The city of Manhattan was just stirring, its streets slick with early morning mist. Taxi horns echoed faintly through narrow avenues, and steam curled from the grates in the sidewalks. In a high-rise office on the 52nd floor, sunlight caught the edges of glass towers, glinting off steel and concrete. But inside Alexander Kane's office, the room remained dim, lit only by the glow of monitors and the soft gleam of polished wood. Alexander sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his tailored navy suit slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened after a sleepless night. His fingers drummed rhythmically on the surface of a thick contract, eyes scanning columns of numbers that no longer made him feel in control. At 42, Alexander had built a tech empire from scratch, amassing wealth that most could only dream of. Yet now, all of it teetered on the edge of collapse. Today, at 8 a.m., he was to sign the bankruptcy papers that would officially dissolve his empire. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. Pride, arrogance, misplaced trust. He had relied on people who were supposed to be loyal, competent, and meticulous. And now he was paying the price. Alexander had always prided himself on being precise, on seeing patterns others missed. Yet somehow, the mismanagement had slipped through. From his glass-walled office, he could see his employees moving quietly along the corridors. Some stole nervous glances. Others walked past with polite indifference. The silence was heavy, a reminder of the respect he commanded, yet couldn't feel today. Meanwhile, a different kind of observer moved among the office desks. Clara Evans, 32, cleaning lady, quietly pushing her cart. Clara had developed a habit of noticing small details, whether it was a smudge on a monitor, a crooked frame, or a misaligned spreadsheet lying forgotten on a desk. Most people ignored her presence. Few considered that someone who dusted corners might also have a sharp eye for errors. This morning, her attention was caught by a stack of documents pushed carelessly to one side of Alexander's desk. She paused, leaning slightly to glance at the numbers. Something didn't match. The asset valuations didn't line up with the totals listed elsewhere. A misfiled contract, perhaps, or a miscalculation. Either way, if Alexander signed these papers, the consequences could be catastrophic. Clara hesitated. She was a cleaning lady. What right did she have to question a billionaire's documents? And yet, she couldn't ignore what she saw. Her instincts, practical, honest, and honed by years of managing life's challenges with limited means, told her that someone's life, or at least someone's company, could be destroyed in the next few minutes. She moved closer, brushing the dust from a corner of the desk. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly, careful not to startle him. Alexander looked up sharply, pen paused mid-air. "Yes." His voice was low but edged with irritation. I think there might be an error in these documents," Clara said, pointing gently at the contracts. "The asset valuations here don't match the totals in the attached files. It could cause serious problems if signed this way." Alexander blinked, incredulous. His chest tightened. "Excuse me? Are you suggesting I don't know my own finances?" His words carried a mixture of shock, irritation, and a hint of incredulity that anyone, even a cleaning lady, could question him. Clara held his gaze, calm but firm. "No, sir. I'm just noticing a mismatch. Perhaps a contract was misfiled or a figure miscalculated. It's probably nothing, but it could be critical." A silence fell over the office, broken only by the soft hum of monitors and the distant city sounds. Alexander's pride screamed at him to dismiss her, to push her away, and sign the papers immediately. After all, he was the billionaire. He knew the company better than anyone else. A cleaning lady could not possibly. Yet something in her voice, precise and unassuming, commanded attention. There was no arrogance, no pretense, only clarity. His mind, usually so rigid, forced itself to pause. He glanced at the documents. Something indeed seemed off. The figures she had pointed to were inconsistent. A sudden cold realization struck him. If he signed, the bankruptcy would proceed incorrectly, possibly causing irreversible legal consequences. "Wait," Alexander said, his voice lower now, tinged with disbelief. "Show me what you mean." Clara stepped closer, pointing carefully. "Here," she said, tapping the misfiled contract. "If this is signed now, the filing will be incorrect. You might lose the company even if there's a way to save it." Alexander sank back in his chair, mind racing. 3 minutes ago, he had been ready to end it all. The press releases, the public scrutiny, the humiliating reality. Now, the possibility of a last-minute correction flickered before him, and the world didn't seem so bleak. How did you notice this?" he asked, a mix of astonishment and curiosity creeping into his tone. Clara shrugged slightly, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I pay attention. I notice details others overlook. Numbers, misalignments, patterns. Life has a way of teaching you to see what matters." Alexander's heart pounded, not just from relief, but from a strange, humbling respect. He had surrounded himself with the best accountants, lawyers, and assistants, yet it had taken a cleaning lady to spot what they all missed. His eyes scanned the papers again, comparing her points to the figures. She was right. The misfiled contract, the mismatched totals, it would have destroyed him. His mind whirled, thoughts colliding, pride, relief, embarrassment, gratitude. "Good God," he muttered under his breath. Clara met his gaze without flinching. "Sir, it's probably best to verify everything before you sign," she said softly. Alexander nodded slowly, still trying to process what had just happened. For the first time in years, he felt humbled by someone who had no stake in his wealth, no agenda, yet it saved him from disaster. The city outside continued to wake, oblivious to the drama unfolding in a quiet office. And inside, Alexander Kane realized something important. Mistakes could come from anyone, and sometimes salvation arrived from the most unexpected places. For the first time that morning, he allowed himself a small, wary smile. And for Clara, it was simply another morning on the job, though she had no idea how profoundly her quiet observation had changed the course of a man's life. Alexander Kane sat back in his chair, staring at the stack of documents Clara had pointed out. The hum of the office seemed distant now, his mind fully absorbed in the numbers. How had he, Alexander Kane, the man who had built a tech empire from nothing, almost allowed this to happen? He leaned forward, pushing the papers toward Clara. "Show me exactly what you mean," he said, his voice low but tense. Clara nodded, moving closer with calm precision. She picked up a contract, glancing between it and the financial sheets. "Here," she said softly. "This asset is listed under your liquid holdings, but the contract attached to it shows a different valuation. If signed as is, it will trigger a miscalculation in the bankruptcy filing. You could lose the company permanently, even if some of the numbers are recoverable elsewhere." Alexander blinked, then furrowed his brow. He picked up the contract, scanning the fine print. A cold wave of realization swept over him. She was right. A single misfiled contract had been enough to almost destroy everything he had built. "How? How did you notice this?" he asked, disbelief still creeping into his voice. Clara tilted her head slightly. "I pay attention. I've always noticed details that others ignore, papers, numbers, small inconsistencies. Life taught me to notice what really matters. It's not about your title or my job. It's about being thorough." Alexander exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. He felt a mix of relief, embarrassment, and awe. He had surrounded himself with lawyers, accountants, assistants, people who were supposed to catch every mistake. And yet, it took a cleaning lady to spot the critical error. "You may have just saved me from a monumental disaster," he said finally, almost whispering. Clara gave a small shrug. "I just noticed. That's all." Alexander looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a quiet intelligence and calm confidence that no title or uniform could disguise. For a man accustomed to power and authority, it was disarming. He gestured for her to sit in the guest chair. "Walk me through it, step by step." For the next 20 minutes, they pored over the paperwork. Clara pointed out the misfiled contract and how its valuation conflicted with the totals listed elsewhere. She explained, in clear and methodical terms, where the numbers had gone astray. Alexander listened intently, occasionally nodding, occasionally running his fingers through his hair in disbelief. "This was an oversight by my assistant," he muttered. "I trusted him to handle it. I never thought to check this particular set of files myself." Clara didn't comment on his pride. She simply continued pointing out small inconsistencies, decimal points that didn't match, dates misrecorded, totals slightly off. Each one, taken separately, was minor, but together, they formed a chain reaction that would have led to total disaster. Alexander felt a lump in his throat. His mind raced, thinking about how close he had come to signing the papers and ending the company with one careless pen stroke. The thought was almost unbearable. Pride, arrogance, and trust in the wrong people had brought him to the brink. "How long would it have taken for someone else to notice this?" he asked finally, his voice quieter, more introspective. Clara shrugged again, a gentle smile tugging at her lips. "Maybe never. Maybe hours, maybe days. Or maybe it would have been too late." The truth of her words hit Alexander harder than any blow. The reality of human fallibility, the unpredictability of life, was something he had always brushed aside. He had believed that meticulous planning, rigid oversight, and unquestioned authority were enough to prevent mistakes. Today had proved him wrong. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. The hum of the office returned to his awareness, but it no longer carried tension. Instead, it was a reminder of possibility, of a chance to correct a catastrophic error before it was too late. "Clara," he said after a pause, "you've saved more than just paperwork. You've saved this company. And me." Clara shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "I didn't do it for that, sir. I just noticed something that seemed important. That's all." Alexander shook his head slightly, a faint smile breaking through the tension. "No, it's more than that. Most people wouldn't even look at this, wouldn't notice it. You did. That matters." For a moment, there was a quiet understanding between them, a shared recognition that intellect and diligence are not bound by job titles, wealth, or social position. Clara's humility and clarity had pierced Alexander's arrogance, and he could feel a subtle shift inside himself. The assistant responsible for the error entered the office at that moment, carrying a stack of folders. "Alexander, everything's ready for your signature," he said, unaware of the conversation that had just occurred. Alexander glanced at him, then back at Clara. "Not yet," he said firmly. "We need to verify these documents first." The assistant frowned. "Clara, what are you doing?" Alexander's gaze was steady. She noticed something I almost missed. I trust her observation. "Now step aside." The assistant hesitated, but Clara simply smiled faintly, gesturing to the papers. "It's just a matter of checking the details," she said softly. For the next hour, Alexander and Clara methodically reviewed the files, cross-referencing contracts, recalculating totals, and identifying errors that had gone unnoticed for months. Each discovery was a relief, a chance to undo what could have been an irreversible disaster. During a brief pause, Alexander finally asked, "Tell me, how do you keep such a clear head, even noticing things that everyone else misses?" Clara leaned back slightly, thoughtful. "I suppose it's because I've learned to survive by paying attention. Life doesn't give second chances easily. If you miss something, you pay the price. It becomes a habit, looking closely, thinking carefully, noticing the patterns." Alexander absorbed her words, realizing the truth in them. Here was someone who had built resilience through necessity, someone whose intelligence and diligence came from experience rather than privilege. And in the moments of potential catastrophe, that perspective had saved him. By the time they finished, the immediate threat of signing incorrect bankruptcy papers had passed. Alexander felt a weight lift from his chest, a tension that had been building for months. But more than relief, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: humility. He looked at Clara, feeling an unspoken gratitude. "I owe you more than I can say, not just for saving the company, but for reminding me that I can still learn, even now." Clara smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm glad I could help, sir. Really, that's all." Alexander knew it was more than that. She had not only saved the company, but had begun to save him from his arrogance, from his blind pride, from a near disaster that could have ended it all. And as the office lights reflected on the polished wood of his desk, Alexander Kane realized one immutable truth. Sometimes salvation arrives from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the smallest observations can change destinies. By 8:15 a.m., Alexander Kane's office had transformed from quiet tension to a flurry of professional chaos. The financial advisors, all impeccably dressed and sharply assertive, arrived in quick succession, their polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. They carried tablets, folders, and an air of superiority that suggested they had the final say in every decision Alexander had ever made. "Alexander," began Jonathan Marks, the senior advisor, a man in his late 40s with steel-gray hair and a permanent frown, "everything is ready for your signature. The bankruptcy filing has been prepared according to your instructions. We have deadlines." Alexander glanced at him, his eyes flicking to the carefully recalculated sheets in front of him. "Not yet," he said, his voice calm but firm. "There's been a discovery. I need to review the documents before signing." Marks raised an eyebrow. "Discovery? Sir, we've cross-checked everything. These papers have been verified multiple times." Alexander leaned back, meeting Mark's gaze with quiet intensity. Clara here noticed a misfiled contract, a mistake that would have triggered a false bankruptcy. "I'm having her help me verify the numbers." The room fell silent. The advisors exchanged incredulous looks. A cleaning lady helping the billionaire CEO with sensitive financial documents. Some suppressed snickers, others openly frowned. Clara shifted slightly, unperturbed by the sudden attention. "It's a small discrepancy," she said softly. "Just a matter of cross-checking totals and contract values. It could prevent a major error." Marks opened his mouth, then closed it. Finally, he said, "Sir, with all due respect, this is highly irregular. She is your cleaning staff. She does not have financial authority or accounting credentials." Alexander raised a hand. "I am aware, but she noticed something important. Now, I will hear her out." There was a pause. The tension was thick, like a storm about to break. Mark's jaw tightened, clearly struggling to contain his irritation. The other advisors murmured among themselves, some uneasy, some visibly offended that their expertise was being questioned. Clara took a step forward, pointing at the documents with calm precision. "Here," she said, "this contract shows a valuation of $5 million for an asset, but the total listed elsewhere is only $3 million. That discrepancy would have caused the bankruptcy filing to go through incorrectly. If signed, it would have permanently impacted the company, regardless of other filings." One of the younger advisors, Samantha Liu, frowned. "That's a minor error. We can correct it after filing. It won't matter." Clara shook her head. "It does matter. Once the filing is submitted, the court records are binding. Corrections take weeks, sometimes months, and could expose the company to legal penalties. It's better to verify everything now." Alexander leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Do you see why this is important?" he asked, looking at the advisors. She caught what none of you did. "We will verify the documents fully before signing. That is non-negotiable." Mark's face reddened. "Sir, we have deadlines. Delaying this could create liabilities of its own." "I must insist." Alexander interrupted, his voice calm but steel-edged. "I'm aware of the deadlines, but you will not sign until every number is correct. If you cannot accept that, you may leave." A heavy silence followed. No one moved. Even the assistant who had misfiled the contract shrank slightly into the background, realizing the gravity of the moment. Alexander's tone carried the authority he usually reserved for board meetings and press conferences, but now it was tempered with a humility born from nearly losing everything. Clara continued, her finger tracing the calculations. "There are a few other minor inconsistencies as well. Totals that don't quite match contract values, dates they're misrecorded. None of these are large individually, but combined, they create the appearance of financial instability that isn't accurate." The advisors exchanged glances, some begrudgingly admitting she had a point. Marks folded his arms. "Suppose we can cross-check, but this is highly unusual. The CEO is risking credibility." Alexander gave him a steady look. "Credibility is meaningless if the company collapses due to a preventable error. We check now, or we risk everything. Samantha Lou tapped her tablet nervously. Fine. Let's review the calculations step by step. For the next 45 minutes, the office became a controlled frenzy of numbers, contracts, and careful verification. Alexander and Clara worked side by side, going over every total, every contract value, every date. The advisors grumbled, muttered under their breath, and occasionally questioned her authority, but the evidence was undeniable. Each correction confirmed Clara's observations. Minor errors, misfiled contracts, and overlooked totals. These had gone unnoticed by the supposedly meticulous financial team. Alexander felt a mixture of astonishment and relief. Without Clara, he would have signed his own company's death sentence. At one point, Marks muttered under his breath, "I can't believe this." She's actually right. Alexander leaned back, allowing a small, wry smile. See, expertise isn't always about titles. Sometimes it's about paying attention. Clara looked at him, her calm eyes meeting his. "I just noticed what others overlooked. That's all." Alexander shook his head, the weight of the morning pressing down on him. "No, Clara, it's more than that. You've prevented a disaster. You've reminded me that vigilance matters more than pride. You've reminded me to listen." The advisors, still frowning, continued their verification under Clara's guidance. Slowly, grudging respect began to replace disbelief. They saw the logic, the meticulous reasoning, and the precision she brought to the process. As the clock ticked past 9 a.m., Alexander finally leaned back in his chair. The immediate threat of signing incorrect bankruptcy papers had been neutralized. The company was no longer teetering on the edge of irreversible collapse, at least not because of these errors. Alexander exhaled deeply. "Thank you," he said quietly, turning to Clara. "I almost lost everything because I didn't listen. You've saved the company. You've saved me." Clara smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm glad I could help, sir. That's all." He shook his head slightly, feeling a humility he hadn't felt in years. "No, it's more than that. Most people would never notice. Most people would walk past and assume it wasn't their problem. You noticed. That's what matters." A quiet understanding passed between them, a shared recognition that intelligence, diligence, and integrity are not bound by social position or job title. In the midst of tension and conflict, Alexander saw a new perspective, one that valued careful observation, honesty, and humility above all else. For the first time that morning, he allowed himself to feel something he had long ignored: hope. The company wasn't lost. He wasn't finished. And in Clara's quiet, unassuming way, he had been reminded that salvation often comes from the most unexpected sources. The office had quieted again, the hum of monitors and the occasional phone ringing the only sounds in the room. Alexander Kane leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The morning had been a whirlwind, almost signing bankruptcy papers, being corrected by a cleaning lady, and then a tense confrontation with his financial advisors. Yet now, sitting across from Clara Evans, he felt something unfamiliar, relief tinged with curiosity. Her calm demeanor and precise reasoning had not only saved his company, but also challenged his worldview. A strange thought crept into his mind. Perhaps she had insights beyond this morning's numerical oversight. "Clara," he began carefully, "let's go through the rest of the documents. Step by step. I want to understand everything you noticed and why." Clara nodded, moving closer to the desk. She had already organized the misfiled contracts, highlighting discrepancies and totals that didn't match. "We'll take it slowly," she said. "First, we review the asset valuations. Then, we check the contract dates and cross-reference totals. After that, any additional errors will show themselves." Alexander picked up a contract, glancing at the numbers. "I never realized how easily something like this could slip through. I mean, I have teams of people who are supposed to catch these errors, yet they didn't." Clara leaned forward, pointing at a line item. "People overlook things all the time, sir. Not because they're incompetent, but because they focus on their own tasks. It's easy to miss a small misalignment when you're thinking about larger goals." Alexander nodded slowly, absorbing her words. He had spent decades building an empire, yet here was a reminder that even the most meticulous systems could fail. I suppose I've always valued speed and efficiency over careful cross-checking, he admitted, and I trusted the wrong people to handle details. Clara glanced at him thoughtfully. Sometimes it's not about speed, sir. It's about attention and care. Details make the difference between survival and collapse. For the next hour, they worked quietly, methodically. Alexander began to notice something else, a difference between Claire's approach and the advisor's. She was thorough but patient, precise but gentle. She questioned without accusing, corrected without condescension. It was a style he had rarely seen in his corporate world, where authority often masked arrogance. At one point, Alexander paused, rubbing his temples. "Tell me, Clara, how did you develop this skill? Not many people could do what you just did, and do it calmly under pressure." Clara hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "Life teaches you, sir. When you grow up noticing that a small mistake can have big consequences, you learn to pay attention. My family, we didn't have much. Every cent, every decision mattered. You develop a habit of noticing, of being careful, of thinking ahead." Alexander studied her expression. There was no boastfulness, no attempt to impress. Just honesty, born from experience. He felt a pang of respect, and something else, something rarer in his world, humility. As they continued to review the documents, minor discrepancies emerged, dates that didn't match contracts, totals slightly off in other sheets. Each discovery, while small on its own, added up to a pattern that could have been disastrous. Alexander realized how much he had depended on his assistants and advisors, assuming that systems alone were enough to prevent mistakes. "Look at this," Clara said, tapping a line in a spreadsheet. "This total should be 1.2 million, but it's recorded as 1.05 million. Not a huge difference, but could trigger errors elsewhere if left unchecked." Alexander leaned in, recalculating quickly. "You're right. That would have caused a ripple effect. I would have missed it." For the first time, he felt a deep sense of gratitude towards someone outside his usual circle of influence. It was disorienting but refreshing. He had been so accustomed to deference and yes men that someone speaking plainly, directly, and correctly felt like a revelation. "Clara," he said after a pause, "I think I've underestimated people like you. People outside the boardroom, outside the hierarchy. I always assumed intelligence was measured by degrees, positions, or experience in corporate structures. But you prove otherwise." Clara looked at him, faintly surprised but calm. "I'm just careful, sir. That's all." "No," Alexander said firmly. "It's more than that. You've saved this company, but more importantly, you've reminded me of something I forgot long ago. That careful observation, honesty, and integrity matter more than titles or appearances." For a moment, there was silence between them, a quiet acknowledgement of mutual respect. Alexander felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years, a sense that he was reconnecting with a part of himself lost to ambition and arrogance. The assistant who had misfiled the contract entered again, timidly holding a folder. "Alexander, the team is ready for the final review," he said, eyes darting nervously between Alexander and Clara. Alexander looked up, his gaze steady. "We're not ready yet. Continue reviewing, and make sure everything is double-checked." The assistant hesitated. "Clara, are you helping with this?" Alexander smiled faintly. "Yes, and I trust her judgment. She caught the first error. Why wouldn't I let her continue?" The assistant nodded slowly, muttering under his breath, clearly processing the new dynamics of authority in the room. Hours passed. Numbers were checked, corrected, and verified. Alexander and Clara worked side by side, often in silence, sometimes exchanging observations or small jokes to ease the tension. With each correction, the company's records became more accurate, more reliable, and Alexander felt his confidence grow, not in his own brilliance, but in the knowledge that diligence and honesty could truly save a company. During a rare pause, Alexander asked, "Clara, you didn't need to do this, yet you stayed. Why?" Clara smiled faintly. "Because it mattered. Someone could have made a mistake that wasn't theirs to make, and I could prevent it. That's enough reason for me. Alexander looked at her, absorbing the weight of her words. It was a lesson in humility, in recognizing that the world was full of capable people often overlooked because of their titles, income, or position. By the time the sun had fully risen, Alexander felt a quiet transformation taking root. He was still the CEO, still responsible for millions, but his perspective had shifted. He now understood that leadership wasn't just about control or authority. It was about listening, observing, and valuing the right contributions, wherever they came from. Clara gathered her cleaning supplies quietly, preparing to leave for a short break. Alexander stopped her with a hand gesture. Clara, I want you to know something. Today, you didn't just correct numbers. You reminded me why the details matter, why integrity matters. And I'd like your advice moving forward, if you'll allow it. Clara tilted her head, surprised. Me, sir? Yes, Alexander said firmly. Not as a title, not as a position, but as someone whose judgment I now respect. If you're willing, I want you to stay involved in this process. She paused, considering the offer. Finally, she nodded. I'll help, sir. That's all I can do. Alexander smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and admiration in his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt that he was not alone in facing the immense responsibility of his empire. And he realized that sometimes the most valuable allies came from the most unexpected places. The office was quieter than usual, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Alexander Kane had spent the morning reviewing every document, verifying every figure, and double-checking every contract with Clara's guidance. Each correction had been painstaking, methodical, and exhausting, but necessary. Now, the last major piece of the puzzle remained, confronting the assistant who had misfiled the critical contract. Ethan Cole, a young man in his early 30s, had been with the company for 6 years and had earned a reputation for efficiency. But today, efficiency had betrayed them. Alexander summoned Ethan into the office. The young man entered nervously, clutching a folder as if it were a lifeline. His usual confident stride was replaced by tentative steps, and his eyes darted between Alexander and Clara. Ethan, Alexander began, his voice calm but firm, we need to discuss the contract misfiling. Do you understand the gravity of what almost occurred? Ethan swallowed hard. Yes, sir. I didn't mean. Alexander held up a hand. Save the excuses. I want the facts. Ethan nodded, his hands fidgeting. It was a mistake on my part. I misfiled the contract. I thought I double-checked, but I didn't. I realize now how serious it was. Clara, standing quietly to the side, interjected softly. Ethan, we're not here to punish you, but you need to understand the consequences of errors like this. A small mistake can trigger a cascade of problems, especially at this level. Ethan's face paled. I understand. I see it now. I didn't mean for it to happen. I was following the usual process, but I missed the discrepancy. Alexander's jaw tightened. He felt a surge of anger, not at Ethan personally, but at the complacency that had allowed this to happen. Complacency almost destroyed the company. Pride, misplaced trust, and overconfidence can be just as dangerous as incompetence. Ethan's voice trembled. I understand, sir. I'll do whatever I can to fix it. Alexander paused, taking a deep breath. Part of him wanted to unleash years of frustration, to punish, to remind Ethan of the near-catastrophic consequences. But another part, humbled by Clara's intervention and his own near failure, urged patience. He realized that blaming alone would not repair the damage or prevent future mistakes. Clara and I have already corrected the immediate errors, Alexander said, his tone firm but controlled. The company is safe for now, but this cannot happen again. I expect diligence, accountability, and attention to detail from everyone here, starting with you. Ethan nodded quickly, swallowing hard. Yes, sir. I promise. Alexander studied him for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. Good. Now, I want you to work directly with Clara for the next few days. She will guide you through the verification process. Learn from her. Understand the importance of thoroughness and integrity. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Ethan replied, relief and determination mingling in his voice. Clara gave a small nod, her calm demeanor never wavering. "We'll review everything together, step by step. Mistakes are correctable, but only if we address them openly and carefully." Alexander felt a shift within himself. The confrontation had not been easy, but it had been necessary. He realized that leadership wasn't about dictating orders from above. It was about guiding, correcting, and valuing honesty and competence wherever it came from. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of control. Not the arrogant, possessive control he was used to, but the steady, measured control that came from understanding, humility, and teamwork. After Ethan left to begin the review process with Clara, Alexander remained at his desk, staring at the skyline of Manhattan through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He reflected on the morning's events: the near bankruptcy, the unexpected intervention of a cleaning lady, the confrontation with his assistant. Each incident had been a mirror, reflecting his own flaws and assumptions. He had been reckless, not with money, but with trust. He had assumed that systems, titles, and positions alone were enough to prevent failure. Today had proved him wrong. Clara's quiet wisdom had reminded him that vigilance, observation, and integrity often came from unexpected places. And Ethan's mistake had reinforced the lesson that even the most talented and trusted employees could falter if oversight and accountability were neglected. Alexander exhaled slowly. He felt a growing determination to not just correct errors, but to transform the way his company operated. He would implement checks, foster collaboration, and value honesty above deference. Clara returned a few moments later, carrying a stack of corrected contracts. "Everything is ready for the final verification," she said. Ethan did well under guidance. "The numbers now match perfectly." Alexander nodded, feeling a rare sense of satisfaction. "Good. Thank you, Clara. And thank you for guiding him. You've done more than just correct paperwork. You've helped me correct my perspective." Clara smiled faintly. "I'm glad I could help, sir. That's all." "No," Alexander said firmly. "It's more than that. You've reminded me what leadership truly means. You've reminded me that careful observation, honesty, and diligence are more valuable than any title or position. You've reminded me that mistakes can be corrected if we have the right people paying attention." Clara's expression softened, and Alexander noticed a subtle warmth in her eyes, a quiet acknowledgement of mutual respect. She had entered the office as an observer, almost invisible, and now she had become an essential part of saving the company. As they continued reviewing the final sheets, Alexander reflected on his own growth. He had been on the brink of ruin, blinded by pride and overconfidence. But he had learned humility, patience, and the importance of listening. The lessons were hard-earned, but they were real. By late morning, the documents were fully verified. Every contract, every valuation, every total matched perfectly. The immediate threat of bankruptcy had been neutralized. Alexander allowed himself a moment to lean back, exhale, and appreciate the magnitude of what had been accomplished. "Clara," he said finally, his voice carrying quiet sincerity, "I owe you more than I can ever say, not just for saving the company, but for reminding me of what truly matters. Integrity, diligence, and observation, they can come from anyone, at any level. You've shown me that today." Clara's smile was modest, almost shy. "I'm just glad I noticed in time, sir." Alexander shook his head, a rare smile touching his lips. "No, it's more than that. You've changed the course of my company and my perspective forever." For the first time in months, Alexander Kane felt a sense of calm. The turning point had arrived, not in numbers or contracts, but in understanding, respect, and the quiet wisdom of someone who had been overlooked simply because of her title. And as he looked out over Manhattan, Alexander realized that sometimes the most critical lessons and the most essential allies come from the most unexpected places. By mid-afternoon, the tension in Alexander Kane's office had shifted. What had begun as a near-catastrophic morning was now evolving into a carefully managed recovery. Every contract, every asset valuation, and every total had been verified, cross-checked, and corrected under the meticulous guidance of Clara Evans and Alexander himself. The company was no longer teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. It was stable. Alexander leaned back in his chair, watching Clara organize the final stack of contracts. Her calm, deliberate movements belied the magnitude of what she had accomplished. In the course of a few hours, she had not only prevented financial disaster, but also guided Alexander toward a personal revelation. Leadership required humility, vigilance, and a willingness to listen. "Clara," Alexander said, his voice quiet but earnest, "I can't thank you enough. I was blind to so many details, so many risks. You corrected them all." Clara shook her head slightly. "It's what anyone paying attention could have done, sir. The key is noticing before it's too late." Alexander smiled faintly, realizing that her modesty was part of her strength. She had no desire for credit or recognition, yet her impact was monumental. "I want everyone to understand the importance of what you've done. You've saved the company, and in doing so, you've reminded me how fragile success can be if we ignore the details." Clara glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "You've learned the lesson well, sir. That's what matters most." The legal team had been informed of the corrections, and by late afternoon, the revised bankruptcy filing was ready. Alexander reviewed the documents one last time before signing. The once looming threat of dissolution had been transformed into a controlled, precise submission, thanks to Clara's careful observation and guidance. Once the paperwork was submitted, Alexander called a brief meeting with the senior advisors. Jonathan Marks, Samantha Liu, and the rest were present, their faces a mix of relief and lingering disbelief. "The filing is complete," Alexander announced. "The numbers are correct. The company is stable, and our compliance is ensured. Thanks to careful review, we avoided a near-catastrophic mistake this morning." There was a pause, then Marks nodded slowly. "I admit, I underestimated the situation, and I underestimated her contribution." He gestured toward Clara. "You were right. She caught what we missed." Clara looked down modestly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I just noticed the errors, sir. That's all." Alexander shook his head firmly. "It's more than that. Today's events have taught us all a valuable lesson. Diligence, honesty, and careful observation matter more than rank or title. Clara has demonstrated that perfectly." A subtle murmur of approval swept through the room. The advisors exchanged glances, some sheepish, some thoughtful. Alexander could see that his acknowledgement had shifted the dynamic. Respect, once hierarchical and assumed, was now being earned and given where it was due. Later, in a quieter moment, Alexander and Clara remained in his office. The city outside glittered in the late afternoon sun, its usual rhythm oblivious to the drama that had unfolded inside this high-rise office. "You've changed more than just numbers today, Clara," Alexander said, leaning back in his chair. "You've reminded me what leadership truly means. It's not just about authority. It's about listening, valuing input, and taking responsibility for mistakes, both yours and others." Clara smiled faintly. "I'm glad I could help, sir." "Really?" "No," Alexander said firmly. "It's more than that. You've reminded me that success isn't just about wealth or power. It's about integrity, attention to detail, and respect for those who see what others overlook. You've changed the way I view my company, my employees, and myself." Clara looked at him quietly, her expression calm but perceptive. "I hope that lesson is remembered, sir. Not just by you, but by everyone in the company." Alexander nodded slowly. "It will be. Starting today, we implement stricter verification procedures, encourage open communication, and value input from all levels. Mistakes will be corrected promptly, and diligence will be recognized." He paused, thinking about the employees who had worked tirelessly under him, some overlooked, some underestimated. Today had proven that talent, insight, and care could come from any corner of the organization, if only he had been willing to notice sooner. "Clara," he continued, "I want to reward you for your contribution, not just financially, but formally. I want you recognized for the part you played in saving this company." Clara shook her head. "I don't need recognition, sir. It's enough that the company is safe. That's all I care about." Alexander smiled, a mix of admiration and respect. "I see that. but I insist that you be acknowledged. People need to understand that value comes from observation and integrity, not just title or position. You embody that." She nodded quietly, a faint blush on her cheeks. "Thank you, sir. That's very kind." Later that afternoon, Alexander made a few calls, thanking clients and stakeholders for their patience. Each conversation reaffirmed the relief he felt. Relief that the company was stable, that trust could be rebuilt, and that lessons had been learned the hard way. By the evening, the office was quiet once more. Clara packed up her cleaning cart, ready to leave for the day. Alexander stopped her with a gesture. "Clara, before you go," he said, "know this. Today, you didn't just correct numbers or prevent a filing error. You've changed the way I run this company. You've reminded me, and soon the rest of the team, that diligence, honesty, and attention to detail are what truly matter. I'm grateful. Truly." Clara smiled softly, nodding. "I'm glad I could help, sir. That's all." Alexander watched her leave, feeling a rare sense of peace and accomplishment. The company had been saved, his perspective had shifted, and the lessons of humility, vigilance, and respect had been firmly reinforced. He allowed himself a quiet smile. For Alexander Kane, redemption had begun, not through wealth or power, but through careful observation, integrity, and the unexpected guidance of a woman who had seen what others overlooked. And as he looked out over the city, he realized something profound. Success wasn't measured by fortune alone. It was measured by the courage to recognize mistakes, the wisdom to correct them, and the humility to value those who notice what others miss. The following morning, the Kane Technologies office buzzed with a renewed energy. Employees moved with purpose, their conversations laced with cautious optimism. The near catastrophe of the previous day had shaken the company, but the successful correction of errors and the filing of the bankruptcy documents had instilled a sense of relief and a cautious pride. Alexander Kane walked through the open-plan office, observing the faces of his employees. There was wariness, yes, but also a glimmer of hope. His own transformation from arrogance to humility had not gone unnoticed. He realized that leadership wasn't about maintaining fear or authority. It was about trust, transparency, and respect. He called for a small gathering in the main conference room. A mixture of senior executives and general staff filed in, curious about the sudden assembly. At the front of the room, Alexander stood with Clara beside him, calm but poised. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice steady and confident. "Yesterday, we faced a situation that could have had catastrophic consequences for our company. Thanks to vigilance, diligence, and quick action, we avoided that disaster. But more importantly, we learned a valuable lesson." He paused, scanning the room. "We often assume that intelligence, insight, and dedication are tied to titles or positions. Yesterday proved that's not always true. Sometimes the most critical observations come from unexpected places, and sometimes the quietest voices have the most to teach us." He gestured toward Clara. "This is Clara Evans, one of our cleaning staff. Yesterday, she noticed a discrepancy in our documents that would have triggered a major error in the bankruptcy filing. Thanks to her careful attention, we corrected the records and safeguarded the company. I want everyone here to understand what she has done and to recognize her contribution." There was a stunned silence. Clara, usually reserved and unassuming, looked uncomfortable under the sudden attention. She shook her head, attempting to downplay the acknowledgement. Alexander held up a hand. "No, Clara, this is important. Your diligence and insight saved this company, and it's my responsibility as CEO to ensure that your contribution is recognized. Today, you are officially being acknowledged for your role in safeguarding Kane Technologies." Applause erupted throughout the room. Some employees clapped enthusiastically, some nodded in respectful acknowledgement, and others exchanged whispers of astonishment. Clara's face reddened slightly, but she stood quietly, absorbing the recognition with a mix of humility and pride. One of the senior executives, Jonathan Marks, stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Alexander is right. Clara's observation was not only accurate, but crucial. It serves as a reminder to all of us that excellence isn't defined by position or title. It's about diligence, attention, and integrity. Samantha Liu added, I've never seen such meticulous attention to detail, and it's humbling to realize how much we can learn from someone outside our typical professional circles. Clara's contribution has set a new standard for all of us. Clara finally gave a small smile, her eyes glinting with a mix of modesty and satisfaction. Thank you, she said quietly. I'm just glad the company is safe. Alexander nodded, feeling a surge of pride, not just in her, but in the company itself. This was more than recognition. It was a transformation in culture. Employees now understood that vigilance, honesty, and careful observation were valued, regardless of position. Today, Alexander continued, we move forward with a renewed commitment to collaboration, transparency, and accountability. Mistakes will happen. Humans are not perfect, but we will learn from them. And we will recognize the people who help us correct them, no matter where they come from. The employees exchanged glances, absorbing the message. There was a palpable shift in the room, a recognition that leadership and excellence were not confined to the corner office. It was a moment of cultural recalibration, a quiet revolution that began with one small observation. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Alexander stayed behind with Clara. You handled yourself remarkably yesterday and today, he said. I want you to know that this acknowledgement isn't symbolic. Your insight will be part of how we operate moving forward. I want your perspective included in processes where your observation and judgment can help prevent future errors. Clara blinked, a bit taken aback. Me? In company operations? Yes, Alexander said firmly. Not for a title, not for a position, but for your judgment. We need people who notice what others overlook. That's invaluable, and you've proven you are one of those people. Clara considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. I'll help, sir. That's all I can do. Alexander smiled. That's more than enough. In the following days, Alexander implemented small but significant changes throughout Kane Technologies. Verification processes were strengthened, transparency was emphasized, and employees were encouraged to speak up if they noticed errors, inconsistencies, or potential risks. The atmosphere in the office shifted. Where there had been fear and rigid hierarchy, there was now respect and collaboration. Clara continued her work, as always, quietly maintaining the office, but she was now consulted regularly on procedural checks and document reviews. Her insights were valued, and her presence served as a reminder that diligence and observation mattered more than titles or appearances. Alexander watched her one afternoon, organizing files with meticulous care. He reflected on how much had changed in just a few days: the company, the culture, and himself. The morning of near bankruptcy now seemed like a distant memory, a catalyst for growth and transformation. He realized that true leadership wasn't about controlling every detail or commanding unquestioned authority. It was about recognizing value where it existed, encouraging collaboration, and fostering an environment where vigilance and integrity were rewarded. Walking through the office later, Alexander noticed employees working with renewed focus and purpose. There were smiles, small conversations, and a sense of shared responsibility that hadn't existed before. It was a tangible shift, and he knew that Clara's intervention had sparked it. He approached her quietly. Clara, he said softly, thank you, not just for yesterday, but for everything. You've reminded me why attention, honesty, and integrity are more important than any title or paycheck. You've reminded all of us. Clara gave a small, quiet smile. I'm glad I could help, sir. That's enough for me. Alexander nodded, a warm sense of gratitude settling over him. It's more than enough for me, too, and it will be remembered. As the sun set over Manhattan, casting golden light across the office, Alexander Kane felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The company had been saved, lessons had been learned, and the culture had shifted toward respect, vigilance, and collaboration. Clara's quiet wisdom had transformed not just the company, but the people within it, including him. In the weeks that followed, Kane Technologies flourished. Employees felt empowered to speak up, mistakes were caught and corrected early, and the company's operations became stronger and more resilient than ever. And Clara? She remained the quiet, unassuming hero who had saved the company not with a title, but with observation, integrity, and courage. Alexander often looked at her with a quiet smile, a subtle acknowledgement of the debt he could never fully repay, but one he would honor every day by leading differently, with humility and respect. Morning sunlight spilled across the Kane Technologies office, bathing the polished floors and sleek workstations in a warm glow. The city outside hummed with its usual rhythm, but inside, the atmosphere was markedly different. The tension and fear that had once haunted the company's corridors had been replaced with a sense of purpose, calm diligence, and quiet pride. Alexander Kane stood by the window, observing the scene below. Employees moved efficiently, but not frantically, communicating openly and checking each other's work with a shared commitment to accuracy and excellence. The changes implemented after the near bankruptcy were clearly taking root, and the company was stronger for it. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not the shallow thrill of profit or power, but a more profound contentment that came from knowing he had survived a crisis and learned from it. He had been forced to confront his own arrogance and assumptions, and in doing so, had rediscovered the qualities that made true leadership possible: humility, attentiveness, and respect for the contributions of others. Clara Evans entered the office quietly, her cleaning cart in tow. She moved with the same deliberate care she had always shown, but there was a subtle shift in the way people acknowledged her. She was no longer merely the cleaning staff. She was a symbol of diligence, integrity, and quiet courage, a reminder that sometimes the smallest actions could have the greatest impact. Alexander called her over. "Clara," he said, his voice calm and warm, "how are the morning preparations going?" Clara smiled faintly. "Everything is on schedule, sir. I've double-checked the supplies, and everything is ready for the day." Alexander nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. The operational details mattered, and Clara ensured they were never overlooked. But it was more than that. Her presence served as a constant reminder of vigilance, integrity, and the power of quiet observation. "I wanted to thank you again," Alexander continued, "not just for yesterday or last week, but for everything you've done since you noticed that discrepancy. You've changed the company, Clara. You've changed how I view leadership, accountability, and respect. I hope you understand the weight of that." Clara shook her head slightly, her modesty evident. "I just noticed what others overlooked, sir. That's all. I'm glad it helped." Alexander smiled, a subtle warmth in his eyes. "It's more than all right. You've reminded me, and all of us, that success is about more than profit margins or numbers. It's about integrity, diligence, and paying attention to what matters, even when it seems insignificant. You embody that lesson." She blinked, slightly overwhelmed by the praise, but maintaining her quiet composure. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." The office buzzed around them, employees working collaboratively, double-checking details, and communicating openly. Alexander watched, realizing that the culture he had once neglected was now thriving. Mistakes were corrected promptly, input was valued at all levels, and diligence was rewarded, not just in words, but in practice. He reflected on the journey of the past few days. The near bankruptcy had been a shock, a humbling reminder that no system, no matter how robust, was immune to human error. Yet it had also been a catalyst, forcing him to see what he had long ignored: that people, not just processes, were the true backbone of the company. Clara approached him with a small folder. "Sir, these are the updated logs from yesterday's verification process. All numbers have been reconciled, and the final reports are ready for review." Alexander took the folder, flipping through the pages with careful attention. Everything was perfect. Every contract matched. Every valuation was correct, and the company's records were fully restored. He exhaled slowly, a sense of relief and accomplishment washing over him. "Excellent work, Clara," he said sincerely. "You've ensured that we're not just safe today, but that our foundation is stronger than ever." And I want you to know that your contributions will be remembered, not just by me, but by the company. Clara smiled faintly. I'm just glad I could help, sir. Alexander nodded. You've done more than help. You've transformed the company's approach to responsibility and diligence. That's a legacy far greater than any title or paycheck. For a moment, they stood in quiet reflection, the hum of the office around them a gentle reminder of the life continuing beyond the crisis. Alexander realized how much had changed, not just the company, but himself. He had learned humility, patience, and the importance of listening. He had learned that leadership required not only authority, but the courage to acknowledge the value of every individual, no matter their position. Later that day, Alexander held a brief meeting with senior management to reinforce the changes. He spoke with conviction about accountability, collaboration, and respect, and he highlighted the importance of recognizing contributions regardless of rank or title. The executives listened attentively, many nodding thoughtfully as they absorbed the lessons that Clara's vigilance had imparted. As the meeting concluded, Alexander returned to his office and watched the city outside. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the skyscrapers and streets. The near bankruptcy was now a distant memory, replaced by a sense of possibility and renewal. Clara entered once more, quietly setting down her cleaning supplies. Alexander gestured for her to stay. You've become an integral part of this company, Clara, he said softly. Not because of a title, but because of your judgment, diligence, and integrity. I hope you understand how much your actions mean to me and to everyone here. Clara looked at him, a small, calm smile on her face. I understand, sir. I'm just glad I can make a difference. Alexander nodded, feeling a rare sense of serenity. The company was safe, the employees were motivated, and a new culture of respect and diligence was taking root. And he had learned a lesson he would never forget, that leadership wasn't about control or power. It was about recognizing value wherever it existed and nurturing it with humility and care. As Clara quietly left the office for the day, Alexander returned to the window, watching the city lights flicker on. The skyline, once a symbol of power and ambition, now felt like a reminder of resilience, vigilance, and the quiet heroes who often went unnoticed. Alexander smiled faintly to himself. Kane Technologies had survived not because of wealth, strategy, or authority alone, but because someone had noticed what others overlooked. And in recognizing that, he had discovered a truth more valuable than profit. That diligence, integrity, and respect could transform not only a company, but its people, and even its CEO. For Alexander Kane, the near bankruptcy had been a wake-up call, a humbling reminder, and ultimately a beginning. And as the city pulsed below, he knew that the company, and he himself, would face the future with greater wisdom, courage, and respect for those who dared to notice what others missed. Clara, in her quiet, unassuming way, had changed everything, and that was just the beginning.